offseason to improve their roster to make them championship contenders. Because obviously, after this season, they have made the conference finals 2 years in a row, but the ultimate goal is obviously to get to the NBA Finals and win a championship. And Anthony Edwards, he's still young, he's 23, he has time, but you want to maximize your star's potential, of course, and they do have a sort of good financial outlook for this offseason, which I'll talk about, which gives them maybe the best opportunity, at least at this very moment, to build a championship contender around Anthony Edwards. So let's get into that. So right now they are, if Julius Randle and Naz Reid both opted in to their player option, then they would be at about $196 million, I believe, which is obviously over the cap and, stuff like that. But because they do have player options, they don't have to opt into that, which a player option means the player decides if they want to opt into whatever that dollar amount is or opt out to become an unrestricted free agent, which, depending on the player's situation and, what other teams around the league are looking like, would obviously determine if a player wants to opt out or opt in. So, my personal opinion, I don't see why Julius Randle, Julius Randle is a little bit different, but I really don't see why either of them would opt in. Let me tell you why. And I saw that Bobby Marks said that he thinks it's likely that they opt in. So obviously he has inside information that I don't, or at least, we know he has information that I don't have, right? So obviously he has credibility in that space. But the reason I say it doesn't make sense is because they are both on the last years of their deal. Now, again, for Naz Reid, it's a little bit different, and I'll explain why. But for Julius Randle, he had an incredible postseason especially, with the Timberwolves. Like, people were questioning his playoff performances in the past. I personally thought it was just due to his injuries. That was my opinion. Like, I felt like last year with the Knicks, if he had not gotten hurt, he was going to go crazy in the playoffs. Because once they got OG, it took a lot of the defensive pressure off him, and they were cooking in January that year. I still remember they went like 12-1 or something. Like, they were like destroying people. And so my opinion was that Julius Randle just unfortunately had playoff inconveniences, that makes sense. Like the year before he was hurt, and then the year they made the playoffs when Jalen Brunson wasn't there, I mean, like, he wasn't the best, but like that team was not a championship team, right? So I'm not saying Julius Randle is the next coming of Michael Jordan in the playoffs, but I do feel like, unlike, no, I'm not trying to throw shade at Harden, but someone like Harden who has had many, many, many playoff chances and appearances and deep runs in the playoffs to, reach higher levels, I feel like Julius Randle didn't have that. He's had a few, and I feel like more so than not, they had just unfortunate circumstances. Like kind of how Chris Paul seemed to get hurt every single playoffs. Like, it didn't matter. It was just crazy. Like, every single year, somehow, he would get hurt in a playoff round. And then it would change everything because he'd be out for the rest of the season or whatever. Like, obviously, it wasn't to that extent, but I just feel like Julius Randle had more of that than, like, the James Harden syndrome. I feel really bad. I'm not trying to say James Harden, like, talk down on him or anything like that. But I'm just saying, I feel like it was more on the Chris Paul just, like, inconvenience side than the, like, just not showing up side, right? So that's just my opinion on that. So going back to Julius Randle's contract is that because he just had such an outstanding playoffs, he had a couple of games, here and there where he was not great, but like overall, he was outstanding. And because he has a player option, he can become an unrestricted free agent. Now, I don't think he's leaving Minnesota, but I think that he's going to opt out to get a longer term deal with them at the same at least $30 million money that he's, getting right now. The reason is, like, I don't know what Minnesota wants to. Obviously, Minnesota would rather him opt in so they can only have to pay him $30 million for 1 year And then, if the year after that, or if next year doesn't go great, like obviously he's, going to be a free agent, and then they don't have to worry about if they don't want to keep him on the roster. So obviously from Minnesota's standpoint, it's better for them if he opts in for this 1 year. But I think from Julius Randle's perspective, I think it makes more sense to opt out because Minnesota is absolutely going to want to keep him at least for next year because, the free agent pool is not, it's not bad, but I feel like with their roster needs and what Julius Randle brings, it's like hard to replace it, especially given that it's not like they have only 2 players under contract and they have all the money in the world to spend, So they are in a good place financially, but at the same time, they're not in like the Sixers were last year or whatever, when they only had one person under contract, so they could basically sign anybody, which is how they got Paul George. So, with that being said, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so Julius Randle. So I think it makes more sense for Julius Randle to opt out and get a long-term deal, whatever, maybe that's 3 years. Doesn't have to be like a 5-year extension or whatever. A 3-year extension with Minnesota. Why? Because the okay, Julius Randle can improve, but I think the chances of him having the high value that he has at this moment, like his value has never been higher, at least to Minnesota, than this moment because of the playoff performance he had. Like, even if he duplicates what he did this year and next year, it's not going to have the same effect because he just did that, right? Like, to them, they saw him do that and they're like, wait, we need to keep him. Like, he's important, right? So I feel like for Julius Randle, it makes the most sense for him to opt out, sign longer term with Minnesota so he can get his money. Like, I'm saying from a business and a personal and a team standpoint for him. Like, I don't think he wants to leave Minnesota, but I think it makes more sense for him if he gets like a 3-year deal at that still $30 million mark. So that way, in case next year doesn't go as well, he is still getting his money for the next couple of years if his value goes down. So I'm saying from Julius Randle's standpoint, I think it makes more sense to opt out. Unless Minnesota is like, we're not going to pay you anything close to that, which I highly doubt they would say, but who knows? So if I am Julius Randle and Minnesota is willing to at least pay me, maybe if they even pay him like 25 per year instead of 30, but you get 3 years, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that financial security would make more sense for Julius Randle. But obviously from a team standpoint, they would want him to opt into his $30 million deal. Regardless, I think he will still be on the Wolves. It's just a matter of what the contract is going to look like and how large it's going to be. For Naz Reid, I feel like, again, there apparently is no other team that can offer him the 14.1, I think it's the max MLE. I'm trying to remember what that number was because I saw it on Bobby Marks's thing. Like, no other team can offer him more than that. He's getting $15 million next year. So he was saying something like that as to why Naz Reid should opt in, because no one could offer him more technically from whatever standpoint that was. But the Timberwolves obviously have Naz Reid's bird rights. So for me, I feel like if I'm Naz Reid, again, talking about the person Naz Reid, it makes way more sense for him to also opt out. Like I said, Julius is a little bit more tricky because, he's a bit older and I don't know if his value is going to get any higher than it is right now. So I feel like it's a bit different. But I feel like for Naz Reid, he's still young and every year he seems to get better. And I feel like he's still ascending and he's going to have plenty of suitors on the market, right? Like, there's plenty of teams who want Naz Reid. Regardless of how much they can pay him is a different story. But like, he has a ton of interest from other teams around the league. So if I'm Naz Reid, I'm leveraging that and I'm saying, I want to opt out, but I want to stay here. Sign me on a longer term deal, but I want more money. And because they have his bird rights, I don't know what the cap is on how much they can actually pay for him. I'm not sure what that number is because I know, for example, going back to the Knicks, just because I was talking about the Knicks to give you an easy example because OKC is in the finals. The Knicks could only pay Isaiah Hartenstein $18 million per year, I believe. But they didn't have his bird rights from what I remember because they didn't draft him. They got him from the Clippers in free agency 2 years ago, 2 years prior to that. So they didn't have his bird rights. And obviously OKC had the money to give him $30 million and it was a no-brainer, right? So in this situation, it's not the same thing as that. Like the Timberwolves, again, maybe there is a cap that they can spend on him, but like because they have his bird rights, I don't think they're obviously he can get like a super max or anything because he's not an all NBA player. Like I'm not saying that, but I would think they can pay him more than $15 million per year if they want to because they have his bird rights. But don't quote me on that. Regardless, he could still get a longer term deal with them. So like, I don't know if it makes more sense for him to opt in unless he thinks that opting in for this one more year, because chances are his value will still be really good next year regardless, right? And maybe he's banking on having an even better year, right? Improving and stuff like that. And so then next year he goes into free agency where I believe, again, don't quote me on this either, I believe other teams around the league next offseason have more money. Like there's more teams with more cap room. I think that's true. And so maybe he's looking at it from that standpoint and being like, okay, I'm going to opt in, play one more year, here. And then if my year goes well, not only was he already going to have interest from other teams to begin with, but now other teams have more money to offer him and he can get a large deal that he wants, right? So that's just my opinion. And then again, Minnesota has his bird rights, so, well, he wouldn't be a restricted free agent, so it's not like they could match the offer, right? Like he's not restricted, it's not the same concept, but it is an interesting consideration. So I guess I could see why he would opt in. So I guess I kind of retract my statement from earlier, but like, it just depends. Minnesota, I think either way would want both of them to opt in. Even though the Naz Reid thing could get tricky if he wants to leave next year, I still think Minnesota from a ownership, executive standpoint would want both of them to opt in because, again, if it doesn't go well next year, then both their contracts are off the books and they have flexibility. So that is the route that I think Minnesota would want to go. Now, besides all that nice, talk about Julius Randle and Naz Reid's contract for a while, now let's get into other potential offseason moves. So let's just say Julius Randle and Naz Reid opt in. So now your roster is looking pretty good. Like you're pretty much running it back. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to leave in free agency. Like I think he's going to go to another team. He is generating a lot of interest elsewhere. And so I wouldn't be shocked if he's back, but I do think that he's going to end up going to another team. And it will also increase, probably Dante DiVincenzo's role, which may make it better for Dante. Like, because when he was, on the Knicks and even when he was on the Warriors prior to that, he was getting heavy minutes and he definitely played a ton of minutes with the Wolves in the playoffs. But like, obviously him and Nickeil are not the same player, but in the same way, they were kind of sharing minutes, if that makes sense. So like now he wouldn't have to, share the minutes with Nickeil. And so that may help Dante, get in rhythm because I know he was struggling to start the playoffs with his shot, with his three-point shot. Like he wasn't shooting that well from three. So I do think that could potentially help him for next season. So I do think Nickeil Alexander-Walker might leave. Like maybe he'll stay, but I think he might leave. So what should the Wolves do outside of those things, right? Well, we obviously have the rumors of the Timberwolves trading for Kevin Durant. Trading for Kevin Durant, which means pairing Anthony Edwards and Kevin Durant together on the same team. The two, best friends, Kevin Durant and Anthony Edwards on the same team. What do you think of that? So that is obviously one thing they are definitely looking into, getting Anthony Edwards another co-star of, Kevin Durant's level, which obviously would require a trade, and then that's where it gets a little tricky, you know, with the moving pieces and who are they giving to Phoenix for Kevin Durant. That just depends. I would think that Naz Reid would have to be included in that deal, but then Naz Reid has to opt in, right? So, like, we're doing a lot of, you know, what ifs here. However, I think that Kevin Durant is definitely something they're considering. So keep that in mind. And then just from a free agency standpoint, I think that they need to go out and target a point guard. And I looked at the free agent point guards that are available, and I didn't love a lot of the options because I felt like either the players did not fit their style of play, they were not going to come for the price that Minnesota would be able to pay, because obviously if, you know, Naz Reid and Julius Randle opt in, they don't have they don't have a max slot or anything like that. So, like, for example, let me just say, like, Fred VanVleet is a free agent. Now, I think he has a team option with the Rockets, so if they pick up the team option, it's irrelevant anyway. But even if they didn't, he would definitely get some money somewhere, maybe not a max deal, but I think it would be more, like, some teams could offer him more than Minnesota could. So with that being said, like, I feel like he's not necessarily a viable option. And then, like I said, some of the other players I don't feel like fit their style of play. The one point guard that I saw on the list that I was like, that would be interesting, is Trey Jones. Trey Jones is an unrestricted free agent on Chicago. Now, Trey Jones used to play on the Spurs for like 4 years or so. Let me tell you, Trey Jones, he kind of is like, it's funny enough they have the same last name, but he's kind of like Tyus Jones. Like, are they brothers? Wait a minute, are Trey Jones and Tyus Jones brothers? Wait a minute. Why did I never put two and two together? Wait, I have to look this up after. Because why did I never think about them being brothers? And now that I think about it, they look alike. Okay, wait, I gotta look this up after the video. I think they're brothers because they do look alike. I don't know why I never put this together. Anyway, they do play similar, so I guess it makes sense if they're brothers. But both, unless they're not brothers, I don't know. But they do kind of look alike. Anyway, so Tyus Jones, if you remember him on the Grizzlies, a lot of people, you know, kind of knew who he was, especially because when Ja Morant was out, he was the one running the show. And he was known for being a point guard who wasn't going to be flashy like Ja Morant, take a lot of risks, but he was never turning the ball over. Efficient with it, you know, scored when he needed to, wasn't going to give you like 25 per game, but was literally just going to be solid everywhere. Just do everything right, not make mistakes, right? Don't turn the ball over. Trey Jones has some of those characteristics. Like, whenever I watched him play, it was just kind of like not a super, you know, risk taker, but like he's going to get you a decent shot. He'll pass the ball. I don't remember him being a high turnover guy. I feel like he was a low turnover guy. Maybe I misremember, but I remember him being a low turnover guy in the Spurs. So, like, and just kind of more of like a pure-ish point guard, in my opinion. So I feel like Trey Jones is a perfect option for them because that's exactly the type of player they need. Like, I don't think their games are necessarily similar, but he's kind of like, I hesitate to compare them because, again, like, I'm not saying they played similar, especially Mike Conley in his prime, but I feel like he's kind of like a younger version of, whoa. I feel like he's kind of like a younger version of this Mike Conley. Like, this older version of Mike Conley, I feel like he's kind of, okay, I messed up the lighting now. I got so excited I knocked the phone out of my hands. I feel like he's like a younger version of this version of Mike Conley. Like, the player that they have right now, Mike Conley, is like, he was never like a super score first point guard, you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't like, I'm trying to find a comparison, but like, okay, let's just use James Harden. Like, no, James Harden's like more pass first now too. All right, well, let's just say Kyrie Irving, right? Kyrie Irving is obviously score first, right? But that doesn't mean he can't get others involved. I feel like Mike Conley was not necessarily score first, but he wasn't necessarily pass first in his prime, right? If that makes sense. I feel like he was a good mix of both. But I feel like at this later stage of his career, he is definitely more pass first than scoring, you know, because of his older age in the NBA. And obviously he has Anthony Edwards. He's not going to be the number one scoring option. So with that being said, I do feel like Trey Jones is kind of like a younger version of that. So if I'm the Timberwolves, I'm looking to get Trey Jones if he's available. I don't know if the Bulls are going to try to re-sign him, but if they're not, look into Trey Jones. I think he might be an interesting option. So thank you guys so much for watching this live stream.